Awesome. So, welcome to the Midday Connect again, everyone. Tuesday, March 4th. We're glad to have Jacob Parry as our presenter today, and we'll turn it over to Jacob.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me. This is fun. I've known Spencer for a long time. I was just thinking about this. This year, I think will be 15 years actually that we've known each other. So I appreciate the invitation. I want to start actually with a poll that I think was prepared. So, Hannah, if you wouldn't mind prepping that, I'm going to be talking about profit engineering. And I want to cater my very short 15-minute message to everyone who's here. And so the poll is trying to identify essentially where everyone's at. And so when we get the poll results, I'll understand whether I need to go a little bit more in detail about specific things or a little bit, or I can skip a few things. So
And it's anonymous.
it is anonymous. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, which is important. We don't want people knowing that you're ignorant about your P&L and stuff. So uh, anyway, yeah. So if you wouldn't mind just submitting that poll, and then Hannah, I don't know how can we display the results real quick? It's just one question, by the way.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so look at that bell curve. So we're pretty much in kind of the mid range of your confidence levels. That's helpful for me to understand. Okay. Uh, so I'm going to share my screen here and I'm just going to jump right in. The fact that, I mean, I'm already 3 minutes into my 15 minutes. So we're going to blow through this, and then uh, I'll allow the Q&A to guide the direction that you guys would want to go. Okay. So let me introduce myself real quick. I think this is really important context. So, as the Chief Growth Officer for Hello Sugar, which by the way, Hello Sugar it's a hair removal franchise. We have about 110 locations across the country. We just started in 2021 as a franchise. We're one of the fastest growing in our vertical. We were just ranked in Entrepreneur's um, fastest growing franchises. I I think it's within the 500. I think we're in the 300 range of all franchises. We're number two in our vertical, just behind European Wax, which is the kind of gorilla in the industry. My entire job is to increase profits and decrease costs for our franchise owners. So I act as kind of a business coach. I monitor metrics. I reach out to owners. I meet with them. I coach them on how to reduce their costs and increase their profits. That's as succinctly as I can put it. That is my entire job. So I spend a lot of time in P&Ls. That's actually where I usually start is I look at the P&L and have identified over the years that I've been doing this very specific categories and what those benchmarks are and what those red flags look like. It's important to note that I do not have a background in finance. My entire career has been in digital marketing uh, with a very like focused aspect into analytics and data. And so as I've shifted into the growth officer role, I've taken with me that view. I actually for 2 to 3 years I was an adjunct professor at BYU teaching analytics in the marketing realm. So I often approach things with a very analytical view. But it's important to note that even though I don't have a finance background, as an owner, and I actually didn't mention that I work as the chief growth officer, but I also am a franchise owner of the same franchise. I own the Las Vegas market. We have 5 locations there, and I own 3 locations in the Austin, Texas market. We just signed 4 more territories, so we're still growing like crazy. But as a business owner, I have been forced to understand how this stuff works from an analytical standpoint, and how do I drive and run my business based on the indicators that I pulled directly out of the P&L. Okay, so I'm gonna blow through. I just have a few slides. I'm gonna blow through them. Okay, if you're interested in having a copy or whatever, I can provide them. It's like there's nothing super proprietary in there. I'll share them. I don't plan on spending a lot of time on them. I want to get through the slides so that I can actually pull up my P&L It's my actual P&L, and I'll walk through very quickly what I kind of the steps that I go through. Again, not going to spend a ton of time in there either, but then we'll open up for questions and we'll run through that. But here's a quick kind of overview of what I want to touch on. Oh, there's that poll. Okay, so just I'm literally a few things. Most of the stuff I'm gonna blow through. The most important thing with a P&L and a balance sheet, which oftentimes, you know, go together. I don't actually spend a ton of time in the balance sheet, but the two things that I would point out are these key questions where the P&L statement answers the question, are we profitable? How are we performing from an operational standpoint? Our operational costs versus our income. Whereas a balance sheet is more of a long-term, are we stable, right? Like what assets do I have? What debts do I have? More long-term, okay? So that's the only thing that I would point out there. This is the last time I'm going to talk about a balance sheet, but I think it's important to distinguish the two when talking about a P&L statement. Okay, so the first one is defining benchmarks. This is extremely important. Now, these benchmarks are specific to Hello Sugar, which is the company that I own and work for. We've identified specific benchmarks. These are also just a short list of examples. We have benchmarks for every single category within the P&L. That includes admin expenses, office supplies, like every single line of accounting, marketing, all that stuff is all included, and we have benchmarks for all of those. Why are benchmarks important? Benchmarks are important because if you don't know whether or not it's performing well or not well, how are you supposed to come up with a plan to fix it, right? So we identify for every single line item in the P&L, where is that healthy range? As an example, you can see in wages here, when we look at staff wages, it should be between 20 and 27% of our total revenue. If it's above that, something's wrong. And if it's below that, something could also be wrong, right? So defining benchmarks is super important. I'm going to skip some of these here. Finding inefficiencies is essentially the next step. When you define your benchmarks and you go through your P&L and you understand and you find those categories that are outside of that healthy range, that is an inefficiency. If your wages is above 27%, there's an inefficiency there, and that should raise red flags, right? So common inefficiencies that exist within our industry and within our business, and what to investigate if those inefficiencies exist. These are all things that should be outlined and understood in whatever business you have or intend to have or will go into or in or whatever, okay? And then we create an action plan. This is just a very small template of what an action plan can look like, right? So the problem area, labor costs are too high. What the goal is, if it's above that 27%, you know, up towards the 29%, how do we bring that down? There are very specific action steps that we identify and walk through. We assign a responsible party and a deadline for those action steps to be taken, and then we reassess. Okay, so that is those are the few slides. I'm going to transition now over to my P&L. So this is January. February isn't yet finished, so I'm not going to show you February. These are actual numbers, okay? And this is kind of where it starts. So when you pull up, and I use QuickBooks, there are other platforms out there that do this. So if you use, you know, a different platform, you may take different steps to find these, but there are, I want to show you 3 specific views that I look at to identify those red flags and then allow me to create an action plan, okay? So when you first open your P&L, it's going to look something like this. Right now it's looking at January, and it's just going to look at each of, all the categories on the left, that's called your chart of accounts, right? And it shows, it kind of breaks it up into categories. You have your, everything from the very top until this section here, this is your COGS. Everything above that is your COGS. Everything below, or what's left, I should say, is your gross profit. All of your expenses come out of your gross profit. Okay. And then at the very bottom, you have your net profit. Okay. So you can see in January, this is all 5 of my locations in Las Vegas, by the way. We were down about $1,200. Now we have some locations that are performing really well and some some that aren't. Some are new, some are old. So we want to identify what's where are those red flags? How do I get from going from negative to not negative, right? Okay, so here are a few views that I look at very specifically to identify these red flags. One is I'll look at percent of income. Super simple. So here it's all it's doing is pulling a percentage for every single line item. Okay. And this is where those benchmarks come in. So if you remember from the slides that I slid through, you'll remember that COGS, we don't want above 60%. So this is healthy. In my industry, in my business, if this is below 60%, it's healthy. Gross profit shouldn't be below 40%, right? Now, if you add these two together, it always adds to 100. So if one is healthy, the other one's going to be healthy, okay? If you remember wages, the benchmark was between 20 and 27%. You can see here that I'm at 22.5%. That's within the healthy range. It's actually on the lower end of what's healthy for our wages. And I just go through every single line item and look to make sure that they're healthy. One that is too high is my my marketing costs. So you see this total. Hello Sugar Media is the agency that does our digital advertising. It's at 13%. I don't want to see that above 10%. So we're high on our marketing. So this is one view that I look at, and that's how I start to identify. Like that's top level. Here's how I identify the very specific things that I want to look at. I now have a line item that I need to create an action plan for. Media. How do I reduce my cost to take it from 13% to below 10%? And then I create that action plan with the deadlines and the responsible party. Okay. Now that's one view. The other view I like to look at is I like to compare the previous period. Okay. So I look at the previous month. So this is January. I'm gonna pull percent of income off, and I'm gonna look at the previous period, and I want to look at dollar change. Okay, and then I'll run this report, and it's going to show you the same thing here. But you'll see that between January and December, I made $753 more dollars than the previous month. Now, what you wouldn't know, unless you were familiar with this industry, is that the winter is our down month. So from December to January, that's like our lowest revenue months, and then we start to come out of it as the warm weather starts to come up. And so our revenue should continue to go up. That's kind of a pattern that we look at. If this were down, I would be a little bit more concerned. But then I just go down the line items and I look at where things are going up and where things are going down. If my revenue goes up, my wages should go up a little bit. If my revenue went up or went down and my wages went up, something's wrong, right? So those are some patterns that I look for. The last view that I want to show and I kind of share with you guys is because right now I'm looking at an aggregate of all 5 locations, right? But if I pull this off and then I only look at my classes are how we separate locations within a single entity. So not every location is its own entity. We have one entity, and then each location is separated by class. I can now run this report that shows each of my locations in the Las Vegas area in that exact same way. And to take it one step further, I can click this percent of income and I can look at that as at a location level. So now I remember how I was talking about the marketing being too high. I can come in here and I can look and I can see, okay, my Aliante location is high. My Henderson location is just a tiny bit high. This one's a little bit high. This one's huge. And this one's a little too high too. So this is where that average is pulling it to that 13%, although all of them are above 10, right? So this is going to help me identify, okay, that Spring Valley, that's the one location that helps me understand how I can better manage my marketing spend. That's the one that's sucking it all. Okay, now talking about wages, which is another big one. I can come back up to wages here. Overall, we're within this healthy range of 22.5%. That's within the healthy benchmark. But I can go location by location and same thing, Spring Valley, they're way higher than that 27%. I need to identify why wages are so high in Spring Valley. Now, I'm skipping some important steps and I'll tell you what they are generally. There are very specific levers that I have identified if these are too high. And these, I mean, that's an important aspect, right? It's not, oh, this is too high. What do I do? I know that if my wages are too high, my scheduling could be off. I could be having people work their own shifts. There could be major gaps in their schedule, which creates what we call hourly wage difference. which I won't get into, but hourly wage difference is bad. You'll see that here. If I see any numbers in hourly wage difference, it means that my estheticians are not making enough money to uh, rely on the commissions. Again, things that you don't necessarily have to know about, but in your industry, those intricacies, those small nuances are what are really important. And so I find this is the red flag finding mission is using your P&L. As soon as you identify those red flags, that's when you create the action plan that uh, you can use to address those red flags. Okay, so I mean that's the crux of it. I mean we could go into a lot more detail here, but I wanted to allow for specific questions that we could go into and have you guys guide us down the rabbit holes and not me. Okay. Should we just transition into the Q&A? I did see some comments. I don't know if those were questions. Let me pull those up.
I think those were earlier. So yeah, if you've got questions, you can come off mute or just put it in the chat if you're not able to come off mute, I guess. I had one, Jacob. Just what are your sources for industry benchmarks?
You know, Spencer and I had a conversation yesterday, and I told him I was going to come up with a slide for this, and I got the information and I totally forgot to put it in
I,
there.
di-
But
I didn't do that to hurt
no,
you.
that's okay. That's okay. I appreciate the poke, the reminder. So there are like baseline benchmarks. In fact, when I say baseline benchmarks, it's like a starting point, right? Because every industry is going to be different. I mean, there will be similarities and there will be overlap, but there is like if you don't know where to start, you're like, I have no idea. There are like healthy benchmarks, like standards for your P&L. And let's see if I can find my notes on that because oh yeah, it's right here. So like COGS, for example, my COGS, I said were the benchmark was 40%. The standard across, best practices is between 25 and 35%. So ours is a little bit higher. So gross profit, 65 to 75% is kind of the standard range. And we have identified we want to go a little bit more aggressive with 60%. Now, how did we identify ours? It was through years of uh, analyzing our P&L. And every single time we make an innovation, and I'll give you an example, every single one of our competitors in the space, European Wax, Sugaring NYC or whatever, they have receptionists. They have a line item for wages that goes to like a live receptionist in their location that checks people out, checks them in. 3 to 4 years ago, we went receptionless. We decided we are going to be a tech company rather than a waxing and sugaring company. And so we created technology and implemented technology to allow us to reduce our costs in reception, which was like a massive amount of wages that disappeared when we introduced technology, texting. So we do a lot of our bookings through text, and we took our receptionists off out of country. So we have virtual assistants that allow us to reduce our costs significantly to allow us to adjust those benchmarks. And every time we make new innovations, we can adjust those benchmarks. So we start from the standard template, and then as we identify those opportunities where we're like, oh, we can tighten this up, we can move it around. That's where we've come from. Any other questions?
Yeah, so the vast a majority of the ratio that you were looking at was a percentage of COGS, and I get it, that's the most relevant and the most effective for this business. But what else key metrics would you be looking at, such as ratios in terms of related to your revenue? What would be the key metrics, for example, or other key metrics that you would look at specifically?
Yeah. So all the percentages that I look at are a percentage of total revenue. So and again, this is going to change depending on industry, I imagine, but I focus mainly on the ones that are most problematic to our business. Payroll and wages is one of those, and I imagine that that's a common one where, in fact, the kind of the templatized standard for payroll, specifically that line item, is between 25 and 35%. we've been able to narrow it down more to the 20 to 27%, which is us, and everyone here should have their own range of healthy. But payroll is one of the main ones. Rent is another one. Now, rent is a fixed cost. This one's a little bit harder. There are two main things with rent. One is whether or not you're using the total square footage that you have, and another one is whether you could negotiate a lower rent with maybe higher term or something like that, right? But ultimately, your fixed costs are those percentages are going to go down as your revenue goes up, period. Um, your leadership is a big one. So if you have managers, if you have uh, um, like for us, we have different types of managers, but in that leadership role, that's a big one where oftentimes people are paying their managers too much. There's their bonus structure or whatever does not align with the growth goals that you have. Manager pay or leadership pay shouldn't exceed, in our case, more than 3% of total revenue. And then marketing is one of the biggest ones, right? So we had just talked about marketing a little bit. Marketing itself, uh, this also depends on industry. When I worked at Vivint Smart Home as a um, leading one of their marketing teams, and our marketing budget was way higher than the 10% that we have, right? If we're over 10%, that's kind of it turns into yellow, more red flag. But their company is 20% is nothing. They'll spend 20%. Some people are way higher than 20%. Marketing makes up. I worked at a company called Room Health, and their marketing budget was probably higher than 30% of their total revenue. And that was the strategy they employed during that time. And it worked really well for them. And that budget was, I mean, it was super, super crazy. But those are examples of the ones that are the most problematic that I focus on the most. A lot of the other ones, you think about your legal and accounting or those type of admin costs. It's like you could look at those, but that's such a small percentage that it's not going to make a major impact. You want to prioritize the ones that are going to have the greatest amount of impact on diving deep into.
Interesting. So you have your location metrics like per location, and then you have your metrics where you look at the overall picture with all the stats brought together. So are there any particular stats that you look at in the big picture that you would not focus in on a single location?
All of them. I mean, I always start big picture. Always. I start at the top. Uh, because you're going to identify different things. In fact, I'll tell you what I did in January. In January, I exported my P&L for the entire 2024. I wanted to make sure that my P&L was accurate for the full year. And it started in that exact same view where I just had every single line item, every single location, I just had one row. And I export it into a Google Sheet. And then I went every line. I clicked on every single line in that P&L, and I looked at every single expense that was attributed to that category. And then I started making notes on the spreadsheet. What's this? Why are there two of these things? Why is this categorized like this? And then once I finished, I had dozens of notes. I sent it to my bookkeeper and I said, hey, go through these and answer and fix all the stuff that I found. And that was all top level, every line item, not like I didn't dig into any one specific thing. So I always start with that. And I also have dashboards like for marketing specifically. As franchise owners, we're provided dashboards that show our costs per booking, our costs per completed appointment, based on what platform it is, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Google or TikTok or our influencer marketing program. And so we start with the P&L, we see yellow or red flag, then we move over to whatever the corresponding platform is to start digging in deeper. And I start to look at location specific marketing costs, and I can see, oh, my cost per booking at this location is super high. Why? And then I look at the ad copy. I mean, so the more you find out, the deeper you can go to find those solutions to manage your business on a day-to-day basis.
Interesting. What do you look at like for a growth plan if you're looking at a new location or growing? Is there any specific thing that I should know about, like that? Any highlights that you look at in terms of a growth plan?
So, are you asking if like what I look at if I'm looking to open a new location, something like that, like that kind of?
Exactly.
Yeah, so there are a couple of different um, paths that I take. One is more of a personal thing where it's like, do I have the financial runway to add another location, and can I afford to take losses uh, while I'm growing my other locations? The other one is we have software that allows us to look at the demographics of the locations that we're interested in growing into. And the third has to do with existing data that we have. What locations do we have that are the closest to where we want to grow? How are they performing? We also look at where our clients come from. And if we see a big population coming from a certain part of the valley or the market or whatever, that's also helpful. But I mean, from a P&L standpoint, um, I don't use the P&L to help me understand where I could grow or where I should grow. The P&L helps me understand whether or not my existing locations are growing and how I can continue to help them grow.
Very interesting. Yeah, it sounds like basically you've mastered your unit economics with the P&L.
We've done pretty good. I mean, there's still, like for me in my specific locations, yes, we've kind of narrowed it down. But as we open and grow in the franchise, we're opening new markets. We're new enough. We're not in every state. I think we're pretty close to half the states. So there are states that we're not in. Every time we open a new market, California has not opened yet. We have a new location opening in California, I think within the next month. We don't know. We don't know what that's going to look like. So every time we open a new market, we have to reassess our benchmarks and identify where they should be for that specific market. But with that mindset, it's easy, right? It's easy when you have the template to rinse and repeat, to copy and paste.
Right on, right on. Thank you.
Yeah, of
Maybe
course.
time for one or two more questions.
I just assume when there aren't questions that I covered everything. And it was
That's
like a
one
perfect
way
Jacob,
to, yeah, that's one way to hear that.
Jacob, I've got one for you. Are you using AI to do any of this analysis? Like it seems like you've got a pretty good process for looking at the P&Ls. Are you using AI to help you identify some of those things that you're looking for just with your eyes?
Not as much as I'd like. We just onboarded a software called QVenchi, which is basically it allows us to aggregate everyone's P&Ls into one place. And like we can not just compare my own location, but I can compare any location with specific criteria. And that's been super helpful. I just had a conversation yesterday with somebody about different ways that we could utilize AI in the data analysis portion. But the short answer is a little bit, but not nearly as much as I'd like. And I think I mean, AI is growing at such a pace that, you know, one, it's hard to keep up with, and two, um, it's hard to know where to go to get what you're looking for. That's a terrible excuse. I want to, and I plan on utilizing AI more. We use AI a ton in our um, other processes as far as like client facing. We just onboarded a company called Poly AI, which is a voice AI for handling phone calls. Uh, um, and so AI is technology just in general at Hello Sugar is one of our main value propositions and what attracts most of our new owners. But uh, admittedly, we could implement significantly more AI into our financial analysis section of the business.
What is your interaction like with your either inside or outside CFO or like how much are you relying on bookkeeper? What's the play, the interaction like between you and them?
So we do have a CFO. The CFO focuses on the finances of the franchise as a business. My job is to focus on on the financials of the individual owners within the network. And so there's actually not a ton of interaction between me and the CFO as we have completely different goals. Um, our when new owners are onboarded, we do have a recommended bookkeeper that more than 90% of our owners use, which is also helpful, allowing us to have access to one person who sends out the same reports for all owners that he has. And then I'm actually in the minority. I do not use the recommended bookkeeper. Uh, I have my own bookkeeper that I've trained to do things differently than what everyone else has. But we also have an onboarding course for all owners that goes through not quite as much detail. I'm building out this profit engineering course. That's where a lot of this content is coming from for our owners to consume specifically for their locations. But we do have some education that helps them understand, basics of balance sheet, P&L, and how to at least set it up, not necessarily how to read it. But there's progress being made there.
Awesome. This is great. Thanks, Jacob, for coming out and sharing your wisdom with us. Super helpful.
Yeah, of course.
All right, everyone. We'll see you all back here next Tuesday at 11. Remember, on the 25th, we've got our demo day. We've already got a couple of startups that are coming in for that. But if you are building a startup or have a close friend or family that's doing that, invite them to connect with us here, and we can get them, if not this month, maybe next month, to come and demo and get some pitch for feedback. And until then, we'll see you. Have a great Tuesday.